Trump is cutting the purse strings off of Zelensky. How is this expected to pan out with the meeting actually happening between Putin and Trump soon?
Say, though you've gone straight to the question, allow me to just give a very brief preamble.
Sure. It is actually based on your post that you made that prompted this discussion.
I just want to preface it very briefly. Sure. And that is, how this Trump phenomena is unfolding. So the common understanding of Trump is that he is this outlandish maverick who just comes to the dais and, says something. For example, he'll say, let's clean up Gaza. And people think, oh, it's such an insensitive American way of putting things across. But I've been saying for a while means 1 or 2 weeks, that Trump needs to be taken seriously, not literally. But, and why I say that is that there is a lot of thought and deep policy expertise behind this Trump phenomenon. You'll be surprised. This whole Hudson Institute, Project 2025, America First Policy Institute, his ideologue Steve Bannon, they have been working for 5 years. For example, this Gaza plan was, I'm told, first aired by Jared Kushner, a very scholarly son-in-law, at the Cairo University 1 year back. So it's just not, real estate solution. It has been thought through. Whether it works or not is a different matter. Yeah. So he needs to be taken seriously, not literally. And now let's come to this question of, this last week, particularly the weekend, if you've been following the Munich Security Conference.
Yes.
It was bloodbath for Europe.
Yes.
They didn't expect what he would do. But my question is, why did you not expect what he did? Because he's been saying this for years. So if you are surprised, it's your fault. Whether you agree with him or not is a very different matter. But he's been saying for years, and why from the days of President Roosevelt, America has been telling Europe that, listen, you are a rich, prosperous society. Please spend on your defense. Stop freeloading on us. But Europe wouldn't do it. And look at the consequences. Russia is a $2 trillion economy. The combined West is $41 trillion. And who's winning on the ground? It's Russia, because they have resourced their, national security framework. So I'm saying, you brought this up. So it's that context. He's been saying this for years. You must step up your expenditure on defense. So that is one part of it. And look what Pete Hegseth said. Pete Hegseth just before the Munich Security Conference said, listen, the Russian army is your problem. We will deal with the Russian Navy in Arctic, Greenland, Ireland Gap. But the army is your problem, please. We are no longer doing it. And the Europeans appear surprised. Why are you surprised? People have been arguing for many years. When I was a colonel and all this talk was taking place about, Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, what would the Germans say? The Germans would say, we don't patrol by night. The armies patrol by day. Is it a joke? They were asked to give troops. They said, we'll give dogs. They were not taking national security seriously. They were disrespectful to national security. And look at what Trump has done. He has done what many people were threatening to do and never did. And he's done it. So now you are feeling abandoned. You are feeling disoriented. You are feeling paralyzed. I'm not, batting for either side. All I'm saying is that why are you surprised? He is like that. He has a very transactional reasoning, but it's not that it's not been thought through. And now why the tweet? When I say there is deep policy thinking, expertise behind this, see, look at the people on his team. People like Elbridge Colby. They have been saying for long that let's pivot to the Indo-Pacific where the real threat lies. I'm quoting to you now George Yeo, a Singapore diplomat, who quotes a Chinese diplomat, unnamed. And the Chinese diplomat says, see, whenever we are in trouble, whenever we are under pressure from the Americans in the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East comes to our rescue. And that's exactly what happens. The pivot is first interrupted by Ukraine. Why? Because the Europeans were not spending enough on defense. So America has to intervene. Whom benefits? China. Then, of course, something happens in the Middle East. Who gets sucked in? Look at what this has done. From the year 1990 to 2010, the year Iraq, Libya, all this stuff was happening, and the American military arm went into this beehive of the Middle East. Those 20 years were the time that China used most to build its military.
Absolutely.
Now, when this pivot was to happen, it gets interrupted by this. So why do I say this is a new geopolitical gambit? Look at Kissinger. Henry Kissinger told the Americans, in your statecraft, don't violate one fundamental attribute. Don't let the Russians and the Chinese come close together. Wisdom, wise words. What did the Americans do? Push the Russians into the Chinese embrace. So now I think Trump's team is saying that we'll align our relationship with Russia for all kinds of reasons. We'll prioritize it over that other lazy part of Europe which doesn't spend on defense. And in doing so, we'll drive a wedge between this. This alliance was growing very strongly. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. The way the Chinese have helped the Russians out of Ukraine, I think we discussed in that earlier episode too. They've given them chips, CNC equipment, almost anything that was bordering on that, gray line between civil and military. Russia would not be in the fight today because without the Chinese. North Koreans, of course, gave them troops, 10,000 troops, artillery, munitions, and the Iranians gave them Shahzad drones. Now, if I am in Washington and I say, all right, I reach out to the Russians, I weaken the Russo-Chinese alliance, and I also signal to Iran that Russia is no longer your partner or not such a close partner. I mean, it is in my interest. And having so prioritized Russia, I pivot to the Indo-Pacific. So there is broader, and why? Because they know the real threat lies there, Taiwan. So I'm just, trying to contest this argument of this mad, outlandish maverick called Trump. That's his way of operating, but behind him is a very smart band of people who may not think like us. I don't agree with everything that they do, but Steve Bannon, Elon Musk, and a whole lot of people, Marco Rubio, and so on and so forth, they've been making, Jared Kushner, they've been making these points for a while. And that other bit is, also true. The tiger and the lion, that's brutal geopolitics. The tiger and the lion sat in Riyadh and were deciding what to do with the fawn. The lessons in the Indian context are, please be respectful of national security. So, that's, what shall I say, my opening gambit. And now you can
Thank you. So I just want to kind of go back to one of the first points that you made about him not being taken seriously, about people being in disarray around him when he makes these statements. I think one is to do with the fact that he was actually strategically undermined from within his system the last time he was president. So there were a lot of things that he did advocate for that never came to be. Despite that, he did charge the Koreans more for their defense. He started doing that with the Asian allies, Korea, Japan, but I think the Koreans immediately paid up. And one other thing, with my dialogue with people from EU analysts as well as people deeply involved in the security aspects, what I realize is that they are still to come to terms with a Trump re-election. They genuinely did not believe that it was possible. The amount of money that has been funneled into Europe, and not all of them through legitimate means, but it kept their system functioning. They're genuinely not... they haven't come to terms. They still kind of hope that at some point this nightmare for them comes to an end. They're in shock. They cannot believe that this is happening, but they're also not working towards making it happen. There is no way that they are, working towards a stabilization from their end. Now, when you mentioned that, will armies patrol only at night, I remember that the Swiss Air Force also said something like that they will stop working at 5 p.m. So that was, that was quite shocking.
The American military was prioritizing climate change over China. One of the former CNC IPACOM said that.
Nice.
They were prioritizing DEI over operational preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
So these, I mean, they took it to one extreme. I mean, I'm not an expert in that domain, but what is the 64 gender nonsense here? 64 genders? I mean, common sense.
It's 72, I
Oh,
think.
yes. So at some point, they lost common sense. And see what is happening. If you follow history, there's a guy called Neil Ferguson. Do follow him, a very intelligent guy. He's right of center, but he's intelligent. And he says, he's compared this whole thing with the FDR's New Deal. So FDR came back on the back of a depression and, brought government in, increased federal agencies, increased the American footprint, all that stuff. But he brought momentum, just like executive orders of Trump. He was doing a similar thing. Trump is coming on the back of a boom and is bringing down this monumental federal bureaucracy, which had actually become a pain in the neck for the American people. I mean, this Dodge business, Elon Musk says he met an American general who said that, Pentagon was built in 18 months. But today, to repair a staircase in Pentagon, it takes 36 months. All kinds of stupid bureaucracy. And that is what people say. This is some kind of parallel to a French Revolution. The French Revolution was against a monarchy. This is voting against this federal bureaucracy. Although some of that, those scandals which are now coming out, Social Security, somebody is being paid who's 360 years old. I mean, it's America. 360 years old means funds are being fudged. So there were whole kinds of inefficiencies which came in, which led to the fact that they have a $36 trillion debt. Their debt servicing is $1 trillion. And again, Neil tells us that moment in history your debt servicing becomes larger than your defense budget, it is the surest sign of decline. So at one level, these were these very deep problems which Trump raised with the American people, and they understood. M.J. Akbar wrote a wonderful article. He said Kamala was the Princess of Washington, the bureaucracy, the elite. Trump's mind lived in America. He understood the problems of the people. So he's a maverick. One doesn't agree with everything that he says, but we cannot dismiss this phenomena as, the outrage of an outlandish maverick. All I'm saying is that there is a lot of thought behind this, and Trump needs to be taken seriously.
So I have a few follow-up questions. One is to the fact that you mentioned how close the previous regime drove Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia, right? It was being called the new axis of evil. And India was supposed to be clubbed with these at some point, right? Every time we denied US intervention in terms of, in them dictating the terms, we were told to combine. Of course, the realists knew that wasn't going to happen, but there was this talk of the new axis. What do you think is the status of this sort of collaboration now?
So, Trump has launched an all-out attack on BRICS because China was positioning BRICS and China within BRICS to challenge American hegemony. Now, if Russia is going to be the foremost partner of USA and Europe, what happens to BRICS? So he is trying to split BRICS. He's trying to split this axis. And this axis was becoming powerful. Look what it was doing. What is the foundation of American power? The foundation of American power is, of course, technology, talent, all that stuff, but also the freedom of its military to roam the globe, which means that there should be no regional hegemon with the power to contest USA. And look what was happening. Russia was this hegemon, part of CRIC, which could challenge USA. In the West Asia, it could be Iran. Before what Israel did, Iran's whole province was growing. The Shiite crescent was becoming powerful in the Middle East. And of course, here in the Pacific is China. And Trump knows than anybody else that never before has anybody posed a more serious challenge to American hegemony than China. It is a very serious challenge in technology, in terms of economy. They are serious challenges. Look at DeepSeek and all that. So American power to roam the globe was being constrained. Quick. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea.
Yeah.
North Korea was creating problems for America, America's allies, South Korea and the Korean Peninsula. That was another front opening up.
Mm.
So I think Trump's team used this equation that Trump had with Putin. There is that personal aspect to it, but said, why not? Let's split them. So I think from the American point of view, it's not a done deal. Let me give you two more issues. Why all this may not work out. Kishore Mehbubani has written a lovely piece in the Foreign Policy today. And he says, look, if Europe starts asserting itself, Trump will run into problems. And what is he suggesting? Trump is forcing Europe to raise its defense expenditure to 5% of GDP. Now, if Europe actually has to do it, 5% of GDP is 1 point some trillion dollars. America is spending just $950 billion. So Kishore is saying that if Europe can spend $1 trillion on defense, it should walk out of NATO. It should threaten Trump that we'll walk out of NATO. He also argues that just like ASEAN, which is a trading organization, has done a wonderful deal with China, it is the largest trading relationship. EU, which is a very powerful trading bloc, can do a gambit with Russia. If America is being smart, why can't Europe do it? And the third point he makes is that in the Pacific, the battle is between China and USA. So why is Europe following USA to the Pacific? Let China and USA sort it out. So there are options available to Europe too. And look, so Gorika, as all this is happening, what should worry us the most? Last week, Admiral Pepparo, the CNC of IPACOM, wrote an article, or it was an interview, I think, in the Financial Times, where he's saying that these Chinese exercises around Taiwan are no longer exercises. They are rehearsals for an attack. So as the world is focused on Europe, Ukraine, is this not ideal moment for Xi to do something in Taiwan? I'm not saying he'll do it, but there is an opportunity. And if that happens, if Taiwan goes, just see, if the Chinese build their power and Xi tells a very transactional Trump that, listen, look at our power. We will get into this bloody fight. You will also suffer a great deal. Why not do a deal? Let's do a deal over Arctic, Greenland, Taiwan. Let Taiwan be with me. You take that. And let's settle it. Retreat to your corner of the Pacific. I'll be in my corner of the Pacific. Between us, we'll carve out the world. Now, I'm not saying Trump will agree, but a very transactional Trump. He will do everything for deterrence and everything else short of shedding American blood. If that happens, it will be the Suez moment for the United States of America. Suez, after which UK, there's a precipitous decline in British power. Could be. I mean, geopolitics is all possibilities. That's why I find it so very interesting. But the tragedy is these debates are not there in India. So we have the game.
I think India is attracting a lot of scholars, but they come on prime time to give you a few sound bites, and that's the persistence and follow-ups and actually having that discussion. I absolutely keep pointing it out, but
on this point, I make just 2 quick points on the need for high-quality ideation and national security in geopolitics. It's picking up, but it should grow. See, I'll just give 2 to 3 very quick examples. So the third week of December, a report comes out on the PRC and the PLA, which the whole world is reading. Where does this report come from? CSIS, Pentagon. Who is the most proximate competitor threat to India? China. It doesn't come out from India. So we are ideating on China through American eyes. There is Australian Strategic Policy Institute Critical Technology Tracker. It tells you who's leading in technologies, trailing in technologies. Why is Australia doing it? What are Indian think tanks doing? If you don't ideate in national security in a high quality manner and let ideation be done by somebody else, you'll constantly react and you will not act. And now, as we are getting into this big league, I say this is a contest between a declining hegemon, USA, a rising challenger, and this aspiring Vishwamandhu. We have to step up our game in national security in terms of depth of analysis, research, nuance, sophistication. So many opportunities there.
How do you see that happening? Look, you bring up many points, and I have several questions actually noted down from whatever you've said so far. But this is something that is close to me as well, because I've been listening to and working with analysts for quite a long time, but I do not see anyone moving beyond short-term ROI. And I've actually looked at, there's no private participation. The most suited to this are industrialists, and they don't have to be at the scale everybody names Adani and Ambani. Perhaps they'll work, liaison with the government. But there's a ton of the Zohos and the Manipals, and there's local ones. There's so many people, but they are not engaged in educational, intellectual.
Short-sightedness. So let me give you one piece of data. The USA spends $975 billion on R&D in science. $700 billion come from the private sector in USA. Are they fools? 700. India spends a total of $30 billion. 975, 30. Bare minimum from the private sector. Why does the private sector not? And not just science R&D, geopolitics of space, geopolitics of chips, all these issues that we are discussing. Is this an opening ambit? This Neil Ferguson and even the other guy, Ian Bremmer, they run firms of geopolitical risk in Europe and USA. And they make millions. Private sectors investing in high quality analysis. हमारे यहाँ पता नहीं क्या, they are so consumed by their quarterly profits.
Exactly. It's extremely short term. It's always quarterly and an immediate ROI. I've even spoken with analyst teams, but
people like you will change this, I'm sure. India's changed.
I would genuinely, look to support a few people who I can work with and bring out papers and have those discussions. In fact, I am in several groups where we do this already. But it takes a monetary commitment to have them work full-time. Ideation like that is not something that happens without, security as such. Ian Bremmer, speaking of him, I kind of quoted him today because he was talking about how the law of the jungle is what is going on in Trump's America. In geopolitical terms, but then it has always been the case. No, it's not as if America arm twisting every state to do its bidding before this was not the law of the jungle. Of course, it's the largest economy, and then it was the law of the jungle even prior to Trump.
Everybody does it.
Right. So one thing that some analysts have pointed out is that when Trump moves out of all of these coalitions, the UN, some UN bodies, then you have he's thinking about NATO. So many other places where the world comes together, so many platforms as such. That seems to open up space for increased Chinese influence. Do you see that as a threat?
Of course. I mean, everybody is looking for opportunities. See, look at China. We must appreciate the good things about China. Trump is talking of all this. They know Trump is transactional. They know Trump reacts to actual stuff. So moment Trump announces $500 billion Stargate, up they come with DeepSeek. They tell you that, listen, the Americans thought that one area where they were ahead of the Chinese was AI. Because the Chinese copy, they cannot innovate. What does DeepSeek tell you? That, listen, we innovate. And we are putting it open source. Check it out. The Americans have conceded 1/30th of the cost, 1/20th of GPUs. Now, this gentleman who's the CEO of DeepSeek, I forget his name because Chinese names are very difficult to recall. But the fact is that he's a bright kid into IT doing hedge funds and all that. And he was offered AI models and applications because there was money in it. He declined, stuck to R&D, see the fruits. So for everything that Trump does, China doesn't talk. It merely responds with actuals. That is why the Americans are seriously worried. I'll give you this example of this. The first island chain. It's a very interesting example. 1950, sorry, Mao is waiting on the eastern coast to 100 miles to cross over and take Taiwan. 100 miles, he thinks he'll do it in 3-4 days. And the Americans send the 7th Fleet. He has to retreat. 1958, another attempt is made. This time the Americans threaten them with a nuclear response. 1995, another crisis. Bill Clinton sends 2 aircraft carriers. Then the Chinese say, all right, A2AD, anti-access area denial. They create this wonderful instrument of long-range precision, ballistic cruise missiles, sensors, shooters linked across space, cyber. Today, or 4 months back, Admiral Paparo said aircraft carriers cannot go into the first island chain. What is my response? Hellscape. What is Hellscape? Autonomous systems.
Mm-hmm.
That time when Mao could not cross, now the Americans cannot enter the first island chain. And behind this military stuff, what is the geopolitical signaling? That we are powerful enough now, as I said before, kindly retreat to your corner of the Pacific. Now, this is how they change the game on ground. All this while, much of the Western media was saying, oh, the Chinese cannot do it, their missiles will miss, this will happen, that will happen. So they are the ones who are acting real time. And that is why the Americans respect the Chinese the most. And therefore, this contest between US China is really going to be a grim one. I'll give you just one more data piece. I was mentioning this ASPI critical technology tracker. 2003 to 2007, in this domain of emerging critical technologies, the Americans lead in 60 out of 65. Lone superpower, nobody is near. Then the Chinese do this diaspora strategy, 1,000 talents plan. 2019 to 23, the same tracker tells us who leads in 57 out of 65? China. Can you think of a more dramatic inversion of technology leadership? 60 out of 65 USA, now 57 out of 65 China. That is why they are such a competitor. We must. A month back, you would have heard of this J36. J36. Now we said, aviation, they are nowhere. They come out with J36, stealth, 3 engines, tailless. And this J36 has got a combat radius of 3,000 kilometers, which means all of Southeast Asia, India, Guam, with refueling over Russia, Alaska. Look at how the power equation is changing. And this J36 is going to be churned out in 2032. When is the American equivalent, the NGAD, next generation air dominance platform, coming out? 2037. For the first time in military aviation history, America is falling back. 400 ship navy, China, 215 times shipbuilding capacities. Now, this is the challenge that China is mounting. This is how geopolitics is changing.
Do you see that changing a little bit with Elon Musk, at the fall of government? Because he is quite technologically oriented, and he did point out how backward the F-35 already was way before he came into the government. And so you expect that there will be some changes at least? Because he's someone...
What is Musk saying? Musk is saying the way technology is moving, it is exponential autonomy at declining costs, which means drone swarms. Right. And not a few drones, lakhs of drones, millions of drones are being swarmed. Now, tomorrow, just listen to this. 1 million drones against an air-crewed platform formation, which means with pilots, and 1 lakh drones The pilot is a liability in the cockpit. It's no fault of the pilot. That's the way technology is changing. Now, to admit to this itself will take organizations years. So Musk sees ahead of you. What has Musk done in Ukraine? He has done what Boeing and Lockheed couldn't do, what NASA didn't do. He has given you LEO space, which is being used for positioning, communications, targeting. He has changed the character of war. You have to concede that he has. He's a brilliant man. He's a genius. Indian system needs a couple of Trumps, a couple of Musks.
Yeah, I don't think Indian systems actually allow for that.
But we
It's
need
quite
talent.
different. Yes. Uh, so you had mentioned that Trump used his private equation with Putin, and Putin's always been open to the West, right? He asked to join NATO, and Trump is sort of taking him up on it in a way. So one thing that I notice in these conversations is that when it comes to personal relationships. For example, Trump has been a huge, he considered former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe a very good friend. So he even considers Prime Minister Modi a good friend. So these sort of things are taken either blown out of proportion from a very fan following perspective, or it is completely dismissed by serious analysts when it comes to realpolitik. Now, what do you think, for example, Macron breaking protocol and dropping Prime Minister Modi off at the airport? It wasn't written about in French magazines or newspapers at all, but it was overblown in the Indian on the Indian side. Same thing with Trump actually taking very good care of Prime Minister Modi and offering him public um, praise when it comes to negotiation, and actually putting him over himself, which someone with Trump's ego is not known to do as much. Same thing with Prime Minister Modi going to receive the Qatari Emir at the airport, breaking protocol. So why are these things not, whereas it seems to work with the leadership, right? Like at their level they seem to know, and this is already decided upon, it's an important aspect of diplomacy. So do you think that this is important, or does it not really have space in these discussions?
No, I think it's hugely important. Hugely, hugely. I couldn't emphasize it more. See, there is that aspect of foreign policy which is process, careful thought, stated positions like strategic autonomy, which have paid dividends over the years. But there is also the personal aspect. It does make a difference. And look at the way our relationship with West Asia has changed. There was a time, when it was all diaspora, oil. Now we are in sync with the modernizing strategic discourse in West Asia, which is about moving away from oil, moving away from religious conservatism, which is about these alternate strategic corridors, IMEC, so on and so forth, which it is like the leader of Qatar, who are these modernists, who are selling a different West Asia, who are saying that we are the world's foremost transportation hub, logistics hub, business hub, Dubai. West Asia is now offering itself as a green energy hub to power AI all over the world. Now, Prime Minister Modi's, I think 6 visits to Qatar, to UAE, they are helping to open links with that, shall I say, part of West Asia, which is modernizing, which is futuristic. Now, Trump also is a businessman. He's transactional. For him, the spoken word matters more than the written word. The bureaucracy will, go by the written word. It has advantages. So, personal relationships of trust matter. They have mattered in the past. They will continue to matter today and in the future. And especially when you have somebody like Prime Minister Modi, who's a long-serving prime minister. So it helps to build continuity into the relationship, so on and so forth. And what is the harm if on the edifice of your national security interests, a personal bonding rapport help? For example, Putin is a good example. And not only Trump, there are many, the problem is with groupthink. There are many American analysts like John Mersheimer, who's of the view that Putin was provoked into attacking.
Absolutely.
You violated a verbal assurance when you said a NATO line will not move westwards, eastwards, and you moved it. And there is everybody, a lot of people have said. So
All
why were
realists. Yes.
all really why were you provoking Putin unnecessarily? You provoked him, and so he did this. So the group think is no that Putin is evil. So this kind of stuff has to go. The West has to realize. Now, when Trump told the Europeans to increase their defense spending, they made fun of him. They created this whole narrative of him being this maverick and all. Why every president said increase defense spending? When you don't increase your defense spending, you force USA to, get entrapped in Europe. And look what China has done in the Indo-Pacific. So what was this? Where was the European wisdom there? Today, Sakurika, all European leaders, all of them are talking of 4%, 5%, a European army. Oh, where was this wisdom before? So there is personal relationships matter. Trust matters, the spoken word matters, even in diplomacy. I mean, I'm one of those who thinks that it matters in geopolitics and diplomacy.
So, with the increased sort of nationalistic fervor in Europe, and they're finally getting things into order when it comes to national security, do you see a sort of return to prior to World War II factions? Do you see a rise of the right, which is also slightly dangerous? But now AfD is supposed to be the most suitable uh, counter to the current German regime. So, how do you see this playing out in that part of the world?
So the rise of the right is a consequence of the failures of the left. And for example, there are many aspects of this liberal view which I agree with, but I cannot agree with this DEI versus operational preparedness, climate change over China. I mean, this kind of stuff. You have to be real about issues. And what is national security? I am a votary of national security, not to warfight, but to increase your deterrence. Peace strength is what Trump is saying. He's not a war fighter. He's saying bring these silly wars to an end.
Absolutely.
And how do you do it? By creating deterrence. Look at India, China. Each time the Chinese see weakness, they will be encouraged to act in a hostile manner. If we have deterrence, and I keep saying deterrence is costly, but wars are costlier. So national security must be woven into our economic statecraft. What wisdom is there in saying, oh, we can't find the monies for national security? In 1962, our GDP was similar to that of China. Per capita GDP was higher than China. And look how we messed it up. So I'm not for warmongering. I'm not for fighting. I'm saying deterrence. Do so much that you deter. For example, there are two ways of looking at China. Prior to Galwan, some of our very fine minds, and I've heard them say, they said, listen, India and China have lived in peace for 6,000 years. 62 was an aberration. All right. Somebody said that you don't understand. These agreements are not violated like this. They have a sanctity. When China thought its interests were not aligned with us, they violated all those agreements in 1 week. This is a consequence of naivete. And I keep quoting Chanakya. I mean, look at that. Look at the clarity of the man. He says, agar shastra ko bhuloge, to Sanskriti kho doge. Shastra ka tyag karoge, to rashtra hi kho doge. He is saying, I mean, a modern interpretation would be, please be wise about positioning your instrument of force in your strategic calculus. It is not to jackboot around the world, just enough to deter. For example, India and China are these number 1 and 3 economies in PPP terms, growing in close proximity for the first time in history, without Himalayas as a buffer, because they've been breached by technology, without Tibet as a buffer. Their geostrategic trajectories are bound to clash. The only way to keep them peaceful is through deterrence and not through hope. So that is just the subtlety of argument. that invest in your instrument of force, invest in a strong military, which is under great political control. It cannot grow rogue. So this national security argument needs to be nursed, thought through. It is not a jingoistic argument of jackbooting around the world. That's not the argument. You're a fine, calibrated, technologically enabled military, which services your national security interests.
Why is it so one sided? When it comes to deterrence, China believes that offense is the best defense. And when it comes to us, like you said, hope is our sort of counter to that. They're not equally balanced at all. So, how do you see this changing? I mean, of course, in terms of military power, we've at least seen in Galwan, which can be called a skirmish at this point, but we've seen that work out in favor of us. But from a deeper strategic thinking perspective, do you still see that to be an issue, that we're still functioning a little bit on hope while they function on offense as defense?
So, the time that I was growing up, there was a gentleman called George Stanham. Have you heard of him?
Sorry, no.
Oh, so George Stanham in the 90s came and created a furor. He said India lacks a strategic culture. So, I mean, today when I look back, India has a very robust strategic culture. I told you what Chanakya says. We are guided by Vasudev Kutumbakum, which is a wonderful idea. One earth, one family, one future. But we should not forget. So it is made out that India is merely a land of spiritual thinkers. Not true. We are also a land of hard-nosed realists. Look at Chanakya. And look at Swami Vivekananda. So Swami Vivekananda says that the world is but a gymnasium where nations come to make themselves strong. What wisdom.
Yes.
Telling you that power matters. Don't be, babes in the wood. And so I say that this George Stanham's proclamation perhaps was an indictment of post-47 India. I don't know where we tended to de-emphasize force and this whole thing about we being, I can be a land of spiritual thinkers, but also hard-nosed realists. Why is it either or? It is both. That is a sign of wisdom. And in fact, you need a great deal of wisdom to be able to leverage force in a sophisticated manner so that it deters and you don't have to use it. It calls for a higher level of, statecraft. Now, much of that got corrected. And, you even under, say, I'll tell you historically, under Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, he got along with General Sundarji. If you haven't heard of him, you must study him. One of the brightest minds we had. And they got along very well. And the time that they got along well, India's military prowess grew. This mechanization, we were spending more than 3% of GDP. Sumandrong Chu, he was a great thinker, the author of India's nuclear doctrine. Some things went wrong, Punjab, Sri Lanka, but he was a great mind. In fact, he was responsible for the intellectual rejuvenation of the Indian army. He was a man far ahead of his times. And when they got along, India's military prowess grew, and then, the usual bureaucracy, something went wrong. So that was one phase. 2014, when this government comes in, I think they have also, I've been arguing, I think, your show also, I said, we have begun a national security makeover. We have started doing reforms which are the most ambitious since independence. So the CDS, DMA, Atmanirbharta and defense. But we have taken the baby steps, but not good enough, especially on account of China. The changes in the character of war. So you've been following the news. At the beginning of this year, both the Prime Minister and the Raksha Mantri said 2025 will be the year of defense reforms, which is political intent to broaden, deepen, and accelerate the reforms. But our problems are so deep that it's not going to be easy. And why are our problems so deep? You need another podcast of 2 hours.
Absolutely.
You
mentioned... Sorry.
Sagori, I can make one point. Last week, Foreign Affairs, or December Foreign Affairs, there is a person, Mari Kalin, I don't know the gender. He or she has written an article on total war. How it used to be mass, then it changed to precision, precise mass. When I was reading that as a general, I said, why have I not written this article? Such a deep understanding of the military defense space by a civilian. Now, unless we develop a tradition of civilian scholars in national security, not diplomacy, national security, who can challenge the generals, push the admirals to do more, push the air marshals to think differently, that change will not come. So civilian high quality talent in ideation and national security from civilians has to come. Only then will we, push these debates and get galvanized into action. So this has to happen. It is a serious failing in our context.
So I think Mara Kalin, let me just share the screen. She's very well known in these circles, I believe. So it's on
Total
the
war.
behind the paywall. Yes.
Yes, that's Mara Collins. Is a male or a female?
Lady, she is a professor at several universities, actually. She's a visiting fellow at Brookings as well.
Brilliant. Get her on your show. Get her on your show.
Oh, I wish. Absolutely. I think I also enjoyed the Dwarkesh Patel episode with what was her name? Sarah. Just a second, Dwarkesh Patel. Just slips my mind right now. By Sarah Payne. So I've watched a lot of those episodes as well. Sure, everybody's biased in a certain way depending on their side of the world, but otherwise I thought it was very well developed. Many of the theories, much of the analysis was very well developed. Now, I just wanted to go back to you mentioning Swami Vivekananda, Chanakya, and several of our, the either or following of the doctrine when it comes to spiritualism and war. Turns out that our best warriors, whether it be Shivaji or Guru Gobind Singh, so all of them have been philosophers and poets, and our most spiritual people, be they Sri Aurobindo or Swami Vivekananda, have been, very aware of the Kshatriya aspect of.
When I was a captain in Jhansi, our GOC was a person called General Hanup Singh. Just Google him, one of our most famous generals. He used to work 6 to 12. After 12, he used to go into dhyan. He was spiritual. He used to get spirituality on the battlefield. No, I am not spiritual at all. I have no damn understanding. But he was. I've seen them in my lifetime. Spiritual. There are stories about him, I think, in 71, Battle of Shakargarh, where he planned his moves based on some... there you are. You pulled him out.
Very famous.
Yes. In fact, you must read this book, Biography of 12 Military Leaders. India's military leadership is a panoply of talent, of great men, thinking men, doers. We have a very high bar to live up to. In fact, one day we must do a story on that. Look at how meritocratic the armed forces are. So General Suhag, General Rawat was a vice chief's son or a deputy chief's son, lieutenant general. General Suhag was a JCO's son. Both became chiefs. Can you have a better example of meritocracy? There's a guy called General Sagat, read him. He goes to a Marwadi school, then to an English school. He does staff college in 2 places. He's the most successful corps commander that we have produced. 1971 Dhaka is because of him. The London Times compares him with Patton and compares the dash to Dhaka with Blitzkrieg. So the Indian military epitomizes brilliance. It epitomizes technological geniuses, leaders. Nathu Singh is a great example. Nathu Singh in the 1930s, 40s engages Sardar Baldev Singh, Sarojini Naidu on a 2-front threat to India, adequacy of defense budget, And he's tipped to be chief. And there's a remarkable conversation between him and Prime Minister Nehru. And Nehru is saying, that we are now on the verge of independence. We have to plan the succession of leaders in the three services. And we don't have the talent, so let's continue with British leaders for a while. So the Navy and the Air Force agree. Nathu says, no, we have a pack of brilliant people. Timaya is that. We can make a transition. And Nehru says, no, 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 that's not true. And Nathu has the guts to tell him, Mr. Prime Minister, if we don't have the experience, pray, what experience do you have to become Prime Minister? Now, a cheeky comment in his career. But this is the ability to speak truth to power. So I keep saying, if you have to look at bars of, military leadership and performance, don't look beyond. Don't have to look at the West. Look here. And so there is a lot of talent. India has a great deal of talent. In fact, we have to somehow transition from mediocrity to talent. That is our biggest challenge today, everywhere, across domains, across walks of life.
So what I understand as a former young person, despite my appearance, I am older than I look for my audiences. But as someone who's seen the education system several times. After 3 degrees, you've seen it several times. So there is no reinforcement of basics, but also there are some aspects, for example, spirituality, nationalism. These are, and excellence. These are 3 things that are completely ignored in the rush to get a degree. And very often what happens is that
I didn't get it. In what? You said they're ignored in what?
in the rush to get a degree. And
In the
there's no
rush.
rush. Frankly, there's no rush. There is just a lack of thought when it comes to a syllabus. When it comes to, say, an ideologically committed institution, there is no dearth of thought. Then there is thought. But when it comes to a regular tier 2 institute, for example, from where I did one of my degrees, then whether it be science, whether it be humanities, whether it be business, there is genuinely a dearth of anything to aspire to. There is a passage of time, there is a ticking of boxes, some assignments, and these are grown people. These are people who could be in the workforce were they not in education. Higher education is supposed to gear the youth towards a purpose. It does not do that. And these are millions of young people that the country is losing out to. The only people who make anything happen have, at least over the last decade, what has happened is this bubble of VC funded excesses. So if you were in an institution like, for example, ISB, you could have an idea. You have the network, your seniors will probably work to connect you with some people, and then your idea gets funding. These ideas are not geared towards profit. That makes you just an executive to the people actually calling the shots, and eventually something like a Byju's or some sort of implosion happens, which has happened to the entire bubble. So this was the sort of decade that most potential high achieving people grew into, and then everybody went into the cubicles. It's a very cloistered space. It's a very protected environment. Current modern schooling is very protected from any outside influences. And then you go into these cubicles where your only information is third hand via these computer screens. And it's social media driven. So there's no way for any of these aspirations to be reinforced. So when you say that there's a lot of potential, I absolutely agree. But there's not a system that allows this potential to come through. So I would like to ask you over here, when it comes to, you've also mentioned how so many of these people were driven by more than just talent. Ideology has seen a lot of bad and good, right? The communists are extremely ideologically committed, like Stalin and Mao and everyone else. So do you see that ideology can also give way for strategic creation of legacy or anything like that? Is that something that is important in building things as well, building excellence?
See, I can only.
Nationalism for the Chinese, for example, Han nationalism for the Chinese.
So I get what you're saying, and just let me reassure you that don't worry. If you're good, nobody can stop you. It just takes a little while, and I'll tell you why. With a couple of wise cracks. So Mark Twain was once asked as to why he was so successful in life, and he said, "I always took great care never to let my schooling."
Yes, in the way of my education. Yes.
Now, experience, I'll tell you, education matters in the long run, not these temporary spurts of schooling. This network here, network there. In the long run, it doesn't. My experience, it worked for me, and I'm sure it will work for you. It doesn't matter. I can tell you out of conviction. But when I was commissioned, I was a normal Air Force officer's son. Many of my course-mates were generals' sons and this and that. In the short term, they benefited. They got the better appointments. One felt a little dejected. In the long run, it didn't matter. In the
It's
long
more
run, it really-
potential of the
yeah.
masses, so to speak, not really the most.
So
Sorry.
I'm giving you some philosophical responses, but rooted in reality.
Right.
I say life at times sounds unfair, but human beings are very fair. For every one, guy who's unfair to you, you will get three who are fair to you. Mentors come from the strangest quarters. They will not even tell you, but they identify talent and they push talent and all this. The other part is this business of education. See how it is changing. I grew up in a very small town, but a good town, Lucknow.
Yeah.
It was very strong on education.
Mm.
So my chemistry teacher, R.P. Agarwal, would on a Friday evening say, he was a brilliant chemistry teacher. He would say, बहुत हो गई chemistry, ये लोग Shakespeare पढ़ के आओ. Monday को Shakespeare discuss करें. Monday morning, Shakespeare was discussed, and the principal would come and say, Agarwal, sorry, kya ho raha hai? He said, Shakespeare discuss. What was he trying to tell you? He was trying to tell you, widen your education. Life end with chemistry. This wide-angled education. Exactly what Mark Twain said.
Absolutely.
In the long run, I have never been too much of a syllabi guy. I have always read beyond and all. In the long run, it helps. Let me give you another example. You would have heard of Leonardo da Vinci,
Yes.
famous painter. He made this painting of, who was that? Famous Mona Lisa. Walter Isaacson, his biography writes, Leonardo da Vinci was a combat engineer from the military engineers. So when he paints Mona Lisa, the face, the dimensions of the face, kitna
Symmetry.
are mathematical equations which he calculated and he's reproduced them in that book. It's amazing. But he also says that, what should the cheeks be like? How should the eyes look? It came from his deep sense of humanities. So he says true genius lies at the intersection of science and humanities. How have we dumbed down our system? Science, science, science. Nothing wrong with science. But just as the exactitude of science is so brilliant, so is the deep insights which come out of poetry so important. So a good nation doubles down on both. And a sensible person develops this worldwide view. So true wisdom, somebody, and see, every day you learn. Last month I was reading The Speaking Tree. It said, Vidya is not knowledge, it is clarity. You can read 12 books and have no clarity. You can read two and have a great deal of clarity. Napoleon used to write love letters to his wife.
Yes.
So one week he wrote, he said, "Beloved, had I more time, my letters to you would have been shorter. Because had I
Yes.
more time, I would have thought through. Even romance needs bloody clarity. So the world needs clarity. Now, these attributes cannot be defined, they cannot be captured by any of our modern metrics. But believe me, in the long run, they matter. True talent matters. True talent will stand out. Look at you spoke of the Chinese system. While you can critique them for being uh, autocracy, they are a meritocracy.
Yes.
Xi got admission into the Chinese Communist Party on his 11th attempt. 10 times he was rejected. A girl like you, I'm told the ticket to prosperity in China is membership of the Chinese Communist Party. It's like the civil services here. Every year in a country as large as China, just two girls get entry into from high school get entry there. Look at the meritocracy. How have they become such an innovative economy? For 15 years, the West argued, oh, they copy, they cheat. They innovate better than you, buddy. And why? Because there, the mayoral economies of Beijing and Shanghai compete in
Mm.
startups. So, what is right will ultimately work. It will ultimately sell. So could be these temporary disappointments, but in the long run, the basics. I'm a big votary of change and technology and all. Yet I believe that there are certain things which just don't change, which is depth, which is substance, those kind of issues. And we must have great faith in those kind of issues. Ultimately, they will triumph. True talent will always triumph.
Only the point really that I was making was more from a systemic perspective, because we have such a large population, and I truly believe that Indians are very smart. I think whatever was said about the IQ thing was a miscalculation. I know I studied it. It was based in a different language that most people do not speak. Indians that I have studied with and all of that. My idea is that when I see institutions like that are spiritually oriented, say Art of Living schools or Isha Foundation schools or Seva Nyaya schools, all of them focus on the physical aspects. They grow up learning all things. There's not as much siloed education. When it comes to modern westernized, overly westernized education, it's in silos. It's not very complete. It's not holistic. It's divided, but also it attracts the students most likely to have a say in future policy making. And as such, I feel like a lot of potential is wasted, not because they're not capable, but because they have no system of even developing their capabilities. What happens is one protected space to another protected space, and then you just lose the zest for life. Everybody goes into the listening to Instagram reels, and that takes up a lot of mind space. So from that perspective, really, if there was something better,
Let me say two things in defense of talent
Mm.
and why it ultimately prevails. So what you're saying, Kishore Mehbubani says that Indians do the best. They beat the Chinese in the most competitive human laboratory in the world, USA.
Mm.
So you're right, Indians are talented. He says if the Indian ecosystem allows the average Indian in India to attain productivity which is just 25% of his Indian counterpart in USA, India's economy will be $25 trillion. So our ecosystem is pulling our talent back.
Yes.
So that is one aspect. Look at what is talent. B.R. Ambedkar, he was a JCO son, Mahar Regiment, because he came from that class. When he went to school, he was not allowed to enter the class. He used to sit outside and strain his ears to hear what the teacher is saying. Imagine. When all the Brahmins like me sat in the front rows, he was outside. In his biography, there's a chapter, No Peon, No Water, because his class was not allowed to go to the normal school tap. The day the peon didn't come, he didn't get water. And this boy goes to London School of Economics. Columbia University, writes your constitution. He shapes, I mean, UPSC, look at his wisdom. He said, why we need UPSC in the constitutional debates? Because in a country where jobs are given by acquaintance and sifarish, and that was the norm, jobs were given by acquaintance and sifarish, we need an independent body. Look at the wisdom of this man. So I'm saying ultimately talent triumphs. But talent has to fight its way, because the way the system is designed, it is to encourage mediocrity over talent. And there has to be a fundamental change in many ways. As your generation grows up and keeps questioning, I see a lot of hope. But ultimately, talent will. Look at where our prime minister has come from.
Absolutely.
I mean, so there are so many examples of talent now triumphing. It is a changing India. When I was commissioned in 1982, if you were not from a public school, your career was virtually done. That's no longer the case. And why is it no longer the case? Because people not from public schools have proved that they are as good as those from public schools, and have nothing against public schools. But it has to be talent from any place. In fact, in national security, the whole argument is of cross-pollination. We should have young minds like you in the Ministry of Defense. We have these kind of minds in the NSCS. It cannot be dominated by government. It is wrong. So this is cross-pollination, civil-military fusion. Ultimately, these things will happen. You can postpone them for a while, but you have to fight this system. And if you are talented and you are willing to fight, there hai andher nahi. I mean, I hope I can reassure you. I have personally seen it in my own case. Ultimately, talent wins. But you have to be dogged. You have to be consistent. You can't afford to give up.
Mm-mm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's always very positive listening to you, not just on my podcast, but anytime I've heard you, you've brought that optimism out in the India story. But I do hope the systems change, just because when it does not, I feel like we're losing out on a lot of masses. The individual fighting the system brings about a few very shiny diamonds, perhaps, but there's a lot of gold that maybe
I
not.
am the biggest advocate of change, more rapid change, deeper change.
Yeah.
And it just needs to happen both for personal reasons and for the larger institutional story.
Absolutely.
Unless India begins to respect talent, we are not going to become this Vishwabandhu or this Vikasit Bharat. It's not going to happen. Please realize this. So talent has to be prioritized. And see why talent is so important. There's a Turkish proverb that when a clown enters a palace, so across levels of hierarchy, he doesn't become king. The palace becomes a circus. Look how brilliant. Talent aapko har jagah chahiye. You know, Trump in his typical way, when he was asked about the H-1B visa, he said, of course, I need talented doctors. I also need talented waiters. Even a waiter has to be talented. And look at this. Absolutely. Now see how these things are being challenged. I referred to you, I mentioned Steve Bannon to you. He is challenging. Do follow him. I don't agree with him, but intelligently and again. Very intelligent.
Yes, he was on an Indian news channel, which surprised me, actually.
Yes,
I think those sound bites were not even available in the US. My issue is that there's no follow-up.
Just 1 minute, second. Do watch him. You know what he's saying? He's questioning Musk and President Trump on H-1B. And what is his logic? He's saying there is no evidence to prove that Indians are more talented than Americans. He says this myth has been spread by American companies so that they have to pay the Indians less and their business costs are cheaper. So he's saying, I'm nailing this lie. So, you know, this whole business of talent is open to multiple interpretations. And America has been structured in H-1B. But he's saying the white kids are as talented as the Indians. Where is the evidence to prove that they are not talented? We have spun the story. Oh, maybe true. I don't know.
No, I mean, actually, metrics-wise, that is not true. It's not that the Indians came in from nowhere. There's some influx, but second-generation American Indians have always...
Look at the importance of talent. The Americans, at least, they concede that America has been built on talent.
Mm.
इंडिया में
Absolutely.
अभी तक वो आवाजें नहीं उठ रही हैं. We don't even talk of that. So in fact, we tend to demean talent.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we say वो अपने को बहुत समझता है. What does that mean? He's
जी.
talented. तो अपने को बहुत समझता है.
Correct. Correct.
अपने को बहुत समझती है. He has got, and see, I'll tell you, I'm in Lucknow, good fight. So what are the good fight? I was in Lamatnia, and
Mm.
Lamatnia had the English speaking lot, and then these schools spring up. Birla Mandir was one other, and City Montessori. Look at the good thing. The City Montessori said, we will take Hindi medium students, but in academics, we'll beat Lamatnia.
Wow.
Listen to me. I think it was in the later years, one day, City Montessori Hindi medium students beat Lamatnia in an English debate. And the principal hauled us over the coals and said, Bekoof to musse haare. But this is good competition.
Yes.
Hindi medium people beat you in English debates. This is the way India must grow. That is the way talent must drive you to higher vistas of productivity and delivery. That would be such a wonderful India, where nothing matters. Like, Surmaniam Swami makes this wonderful argument. This is what is a Brahmin? A Brahmin is not by birth. I'm a Brahmin by birth, but you are no Brahmin. Brahmins are by deed. If you are Jnani, you are Tyagi, and you are Sahasi. What a wonderful thing. You have to be informed, you have to be willing to sacrifice, but you also need courage. So his argument, I know I'm not a scholar in that domain, he says this caste thing, this was the basis of caste. It was not this elitist notion like I've been born a Brahmin, so I'm a Brahmin for life. No, you were Brahmin by deed. If that is the basis of our caste equation, it's a wonderful concept. It is meritocracy. It is talent, based on delivery.
I think that is a topic for another time. But before I let you go, I have one controversial question to ask. Just one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of talk about Bhutan. We've seen the king, we've seen their defense minister, foreign minister, we've seen their prime minister come in today. And there's a lot of talk about, an autonomous region, etc. Is it something that is necessary, that will happen? Your thoughts around it? I'm blank, so.
No. See, this is a very serious issue.
Mm.
It is about Indian power in the neighborhood.
Yes.
And see what is happening. The military component of the power differential with China is $450 billion year on year. I have been arguing for a while that we have to respond to this. There are limits to valor. Because if the military balance shifts in favor of China, which it is, the neighbors will be forced to take note.
Mm.
They are smaller neighbors. They don't have autonomy. They have to exercise choices. And as in human society, so in international relations, you tilt in favor of the powerful. So India must contain this power differential through a host of means. And Bhutan is a small country. It has to take note of what China is doing. So what you have quoted are energetic attempts on behalf of India to, reinforce that relationship. But while we must do everything bilaterally, if we don't take care of the larger imbalance of power, these small nations will not have a choice. And it's not only here, it's in Nepal, it's in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, I know the inventory of the Bangladesh military is 50 to 75% Chinese.
Yes.
Look at what's happening in Myanmar. The military junta's footprint is decreasing. The three Brotherhood Alliance, their influence is increasing, and they are all in the Chinese lap. So look at our complexities. China we have spoken about. Look at what's happening on the Western horizons. Recently, Erdogan, Turkey president, was in Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, talking about Gaza and military partnerships. It's a drone superpower. That drone stuff is going to Pakistan. And you have these new national security realities emerging in Bangladesh and Myanmar. cannot be a grimmer strategic environment than what India faces. So we have to step up our game. And you're absolutely right. All these small neighbors, you have to tend to their needs, but also take care of the larger power imbalance. And therefore, I keep returning to this point. I don't find a more fascinating subject than geopolitics. I'm so glad I never took science because I really think it's a fascinating subject. And I challenge any STEM graduate to come and apply his mind on these issues. Not easy. So it's
STEM.
a it's STEM. You should be good in all things. But isn't geopolitics equally fascinating?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Extremely fascinating.
Well, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, everyone, many, many thanks. It's always a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time today, and hopefully see you soon.
May your podcast grow and may you do even better in life. All the best to you.
Thank you.